Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Wendy Hart. I'm a Senior International Advisor with the Parliament of New Zealand, the Office of the Clerk in New Zealand. Thank you so much for having me in your program. It's so wonderful to see private and public partnership and the sharing of knowledge on digital transformation. I think we all want to see common outcomes and good for our citizens. We aspire to enhance participation and engagement of people with their representative democratic institutions. And digital tools are a really exciting pathway to narrow the gap between citizens and their elected decision makers. So I'm really pleased that I was invited to speak with you today, specifically on the Pacific Hub of the Centre for Innovation in Parliaments. Now, I will give a little background to the Centre for Innovation. This is an initiative of the Interparliamentary Union, which is the global organisation of parliaments. And the IPU brings together around 180 national parliaments and a number of observers, and has a really close relationship with the United Nations as well. Now, the Centre for Innovation in Parliament really harnesses the potential for innovation across parliaments, and it brings us together to share knowledge, supporting collaboration on solutions and sharing knowledge with the wider parliamentary community. And another exciting opportunity coming up later this year, put on by the Interparliamentary Union, is the World Conference of e-Parliaments. So this is a flagship event happening a little later this year. So new technologies are having a major impact on all of our parliaments, operational environments in the public and private sector, and also our cultural landscape. And of course, this is all exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic downturns, and our need to be agile and adapt to change extremely quickly. So a parliament that can harness these new tools is really well positioned to connect with its citizens. Its internal systems will be stronger and its processes more transformative. Social networks and open data are also exciting parts of the conversation that the Centre for Innovation in Parliaments has been convening. Now, the Centre for Innovation has been around since around December 2018, and it's really great to have a platform for sharing strategic documents, planning, digital tools, sharing best practices around parliamentary openness and engagement, standards and open data, citizens engagement, which is really important to us here in New Zealand, new ways and security issues with the internet and social media, electronic documents, records management, digital library and research services. So our scope is very, very wide in the Centre for Innovation. And the Centre for Innovation has also been leading our parliaments in sharing knowledge in terms of publishing a regular innovation tracker. So the New Zealand Parliament is really privileged to be part of the Pacific region. We are quite isolated down the bottom of the world, so we're in a different time zone, of course. We're still in our infancy as a hub, but we've had several meetings. And there's a lot of synergy with the work we are doing in the New Zealand Parliament with the Pacific as part of our wider Taiakiwa Stronger Pacific Parliaments program. And we all share procedural and practical support and tools with each other to maintain healthy and innovative democracies. Pacific parliaments, as I said, we're in a unique part of the world. The Pacific region is made up of thousands of islands spread across a vast ocean. In terms of information and communication technology, this geographic disparity brings some particular and unique challenges. There are high business and government transaction costs, irregularity of cargo and freight, and of course, this has been compounded by COVID-19 border closures and a reduction in air links, and relatively recent communications cables and domestic and international fibre optic cables. So in August last year, the New Zealand Parliament was really pleased to have the first in the virtual sessions of the Pacific Hub of the Centre for Innovation. And I would like to acknowledge here the leadership and support of the United Nations Development Programme Pacific Region Office, who we regularly collaborate with. We were really delighted to have representatives from Australia, the Cook Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of Fiji, French Polynesia, Nauru, New Caledonia, New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa, and the Solomon Islands, plus Vanuatu, register for these virtual discussions. And I think I wanted to let you know those names of the legislatures, because you can see the wide array from the big legislatures of Australia and New Zealand down to some of the smallest in the world, for example, the Cook Islands. We also were delighted to have a special guest, the Director of IST at the Republic of the Maldives legislature. This was a really great way to share knowledge across different regions. A third meeting of our Pacific Hub was held just this February, and we had representatives from Vanuatu, New Zealand, and New Caledonia. And again, this session focused on responding to COVID-19, issues such as responding to MPs needing to work from home, electronic voting, procedural changes, and IST security were all discussed by our panelists. Fortunately, much of the Pacific has remained free of COVID-19 cases, but a number of the smaller jurisdictions moved very swiftly to implement states of emergency, border closures, and quarantine measures to protect vulnerable communities with developing health infrastructure. And of course, this closure of borders has had a heavy impact on the economy, particularly those that are tourism reliant. And it's forecast that full economic recovery will take some years. And I mention this because it all has an impact on the legislature's budgets that are available to invest in IST infrastructure over time. Invariably, the budgets to run Parliament are affected by the general financial climate, and there will be ongoing need to work with partners such as the United Nations Development Programme, Australia and New Zealand, and many other partners, including the Interparliamentary Union. And again, I reiterate, I'm really pleased to see there's been private and community interest in digital transformation in the public sector and particularly in parliaments. Some of the issues that came up during our sessions, we recognise that the COVID-19 pandemic has a tremendous effect on governance systems and structure. So a really great quote from one of the UNDP representatives from the Pacific: "Parliaments as institutions where people need to gather, they meet to fulfill the constitutional mandates of legislation, oversight and representation. So what about when they cannot physically meet?" We explored the technical aspects and adaptations of policies and procedures and the variety of solutions based on IST for parliaments to continue its important work, but really importantly, to maintain openness, transparency and public trust. The importance of the parliamentary network, the sharing of knowledge, and also our preparedness to respond to emergencies were absolutely essential to our discussions around technology and infrastructure. We noticed that the variety and the level and duration of lockdowns varied greatly across the Pacific region, and they impacted the way parliaments operated in very different ways. However, there were a number of common themes raised during our discussions as the Pacific Region Hub. The first of which was business continuity planning. Many of us noted that we'd developed or were developing business continuity plans with natural disasters in mind. For example, cyclones, hurricanes, and earthquakes. Our plans did not contemplate pandemic. Therefore, we recognise that continual testing and recalibration of our business continuity planning is imperative. And it's really important that these plans take into account IST and technology. Some parliaments noted that they did not have a business continuity plan or risk management plan at all. And I was really pleased to see that different members of the hub were offering to assist with templates and examples. a really tangible way of how we can support parliamentary resilience. I would also like to mention an initiative called the Legislative Assembly's Business Continuity Network, or LabCon, which is a working group composed of participating legislative assemblies with a professional interest and expertise in business continuity. And I'm sure you can find their latest guide on the internet, but it's an excellent resource for those developing or reviewing their business continuity plans and forming benchmarks. Another issue that came up during our discussions as the Pacific Hub was equipment and devices. And of course, in my introduction, I mentioned the irregularity of freight and cargo and the disruption of air links. So while we're in lockdown and moving members of parliament and staff extremely quickly to working from home or working remotely, many of our responses relied on the deployment of devices, for example, laptops and smartphones, very quickly. The pandemic has, of course, revealed vulnerabilities in the IST and equipment supply chain, with an inability to access hardware, particularly out of China, for New Zealand and the Pacific. And some staff reported that corporate staff had not worked remotely ever before, and there were emergency requests for hardware and really quick repurposing of VPN, virtual private network capable equipment, to enable a genuinely mobile workforce. Of course, a huge conversation, not just in the Pacific region, but across all of our parliaments, private and public sector institutions, is security, and cybersecurity in particular. So a number of the software products available, for example, Zoom, MS Teams, Cisco WebEx, and add-ons like Poly, are what we call off-the-shelf products. They're general purpose products, and they're not necessarily designed for the parliamentary environment. So these naturally bring some cybersecurity and integrity concerns, particularly as some of the work that Parliament needs to do is done in private. For example, the deliberations of a committee before it reaches an outcome that is publicly disclosed. It was reported that a lot of training was needed to encompass security awareness, and phishing and spear phishing was raised. Another aspect, of course, is human error, and this was an issue prior to COVID, and we've done a lot of training around the safe handling of email products and what to do if a human error is made to protect privacy. Some products have been blocked, or as we call blacklisted, for parliamentary use because they were deemed to be insufficient in terms of security for parliamentary purposes, or deemed to be too vulnerable to exploitation. In the Pacific region, a particular concern is connectivity. So parliaments across the region reported issues of connectivity and internet stability. A number of the Pacific parliaments emphasised also the importance of a backup power source or a generator. And this, of course, has interdependencies with the natural disaster piece of our conversation, whereby power supplies can be knocked out by cyclones and other natural events. Some noted the need to ensure that bandwidth was sufficient and could support multiple concurrent connections and operations on precinct and off precinct. Managing staff and members' connectivity from their homes and electorates is also a bit fraught, and this is often a circumstance in non-COVID times as well. So some parliaments have been issuing mobile modem USB sticks to members and staff as a contingency. Of course, in the parliamentary environment, one of the most interesting parts of this conversation about the intersectionality of digital transformation with our environment is around the procedural aspect. Parliaments, of course, have their standing orders, their procedural rules, and some also have constitutional settings. Some members of the Hub discussed some of the constitutional and procedural barriers to conduct plenary and committee meetings virtually. For example, some have the need to be physically present in the chamber or committee. There was no procedure for proxy voting, e-voting, or virtual voting. Furthermore, the platforms that we were using, sometimes in a very quick way, did not always lend themselves well to the usual conduct of Parliament. For example, managing requests to speak, points of order, and the integrity of voting could be challenged. So we are exploring some of the solutions that different parliaments have employed. Training was also a big theme. Members and staff generally embraced the use of innovative IST solutions and digital technologies during lockdown measures, but training sometimes was provided in quite an ad hoc fashion. We didn't have the luxury of time, and some IST staff themselves had no experience with the product. They were reporting a lot of self-directed learning, for example, having to search the internet or for product information. So this is an opportunity, I think, that the hub can share knowledge on training techniques as well. Support. Parliaments in the Pacific are often staffed by very limited numbers who have multiple different roles. There was an increased pressure on the small number of IST staff in the Pacific and on service desks if they existed. Some of the issues were really simple to resolve. For example, we had members of Parliament locking themselves out by providing their incorrect passwords. So one solution that New Zealand employed to reduce traffic to our service desk and analysts was to provide single sign-on wherever possible using tools such as Azure AD to federate with third-party tools. I touched on this in my introduction, but investment in IST infrastructure, the procurement of hardware and software, and the capacity for sudden transition are going to be ongoing challenges for many parliaments. And I suspect there will be some austerity measures and budget reductions that impact our ongoing investment in technology. Parliaments have also been encouraged to think about moving away from their local infrastructure, for example, local servers, to use cloud-based technology and storage for security. Investment in infrastructure and access to technology are long-term issues that will require multi-year proactive approaches. Notwithstanding this, there's been very many positive outcomes. Pacific parliaments reported how virtual tools had enabled them to engage with many more of their members and communities. Pacific parliaments reported enhanced engagement through digital tools with remote locations and communities. And they also mentioned how great these tools were to engage in international meetings and discussion without needing to fly for several hours. We still have very strong support programs across the Pacific that have been undertaken remotely. For example, one of our parliaments, the Legislative Assembly of Tonga, had a floating budget office initiative with the United Nations Development Programme with assistance from Fiji and New Zealand, Australia, and many other counterparts. And they were able to conduct this research and analysis remotely and still assist the Parliament. So I'd like to share with you one of the stories that came out of our Pacific Region Hub meetings, and I'm sure our colleagues at the Parliament of Fiji won't mind my sharing this with you as it's been part of the innovation tracker. Fiji has been doing great things to innovate and meet the needs of citizens. So the Parliament of Fiji reported that it prioritised the safety and welfare of members and staff while needing to maintain the key functions of Parliament. It had support from the Speaker and Business Committee in Parliament to enable this. It wanted to emphasise the public health measures in place to ensure the safety of MPs and staff. Public access to the Parliament precinct were restricted However, the Parliament and committee sittings were being broadcast to free-to-air channels and live streamed to the Parliament Facebook page and website. Additionally, Parliament and committee sittings and papers were shared electronically. New standards and services were set during this period. So to ensure business continuity, the Parliament utilised tools to work remotely. For example, the Microsoft Office 365 virtual platform was employed to ensure members could continue to function in committees. They did have some hybrid approaches, with some members being physically in committee rooms and others joining remotely. During this period, they ran an astonishing number of committee meetings, and some of them were simultaneous. They also made sure that members could work remotely, and members were issued with laptops, smartphones, and Wi-Fi access to allow for on-demand viewing and sharing of documents. Senior committee clerks were also given these tools. So the Parliament also engaged a vendor based in New Zealand to integrate its video conferencing technology. So they reported that cargo took around 3 weeks and implementation and installation a few days further than that. I mention that because it's just an example of how long some of these solutions can take to deploy in the region. They also put new equipment into the committee rooms, for example, LED screens and wired access points, to ensure that they could have some hybrid committee meetings. Furthermore, they integrated their systems with their Chamber for the Record digital recording system. That Parliament again reported that the members' response was really positive, and they quickly adapted to change with some basic training undertaken during the configuration of devices. And looking forward, that Parliament has said they'd like to optimise the use of the hybrid broadcast platform and explore more cloud-based technologies. So we were really pleased to hear about Fiji's experience with digital technology transformation and also partnering with others to ensure their success. So just concluding, the Pacific region has benefited greatly from having the Centre for Innovation Hub. We've had some wonderful discussions and shared a lot of solutions, challenges, and frustrations. And I again thank Bússola Tech for convening this platform today. Really excited to be part of your program and to hear what other parliaments are doing. So kia ora, thank you from New Zealand.